Friends and Lothian.
This area of scenic beauty is something which has always attracted me. Many of you, of course, go for trips overseas and you go to places to see the scenery. And my interest in it started when I used to go bushwalking up in the Flinders Ranges. Many of you will have done similar sort of trips back in the late 60s. And I thought, this is just such lovely sort of landscapes. And later on, when I was in England studying, I did some work on looking at the methods of landscape assessment. How do you actually measure it and map it? At that stage, it was very much in its infancy. And in the early 80s, I supervised a master's thesis to deal with wilderness conservation. And this person, Rob Leslie, used GIS systems to try and map wilderness quality across South Australia, and he was successful. And it struck me at the time that if you could do that for wilderness, which is a qualitative attribute, why couldn't you do it for landscape? Now, during the 70s right through to the 90s, in the Department of Environment, we learnt a lot about the environment. We came to understand a lot more about the environment that we didn't know at the beginning. And yet all of this thing was physical. It was dealing with the coast, it was dealing with the arid lands, dealing with the biodiversity, and a whole lot of other attributes of the environment, which are all very important, but it was all physical. There was no work being done on qualitative aspects. And so I got more and more interested in looking at landscape as a qualitative attribute of the environment. And in 1992, I decided, well, if I'm going to really get anywhere in this, I've written a few papers on it, I decided to start a PhD on it, part-time, which I did. From 1992, for the next 8 years, worked on PhD on it, and really enjoyed that time because I studied so many different attributes of landscape. So what I want to do is start with the idea of what is beauty, because we all have some sort of ideas that landscape is beautiful, or this particular person looks very beautiful, or this painting is beautiful. I want to show you that it's none of those. I want to show you, this is a pot, a little vase, and some would say, oh, isn't that beautiful? But the beauty doesn't lie in the colour, it doesn't lie in the shape, it doesn't lie in the little gold rim around the top, it doesn't rely on any of those things. What does it rely on? It relies on our mind. It's our mind's perception of the object, not the object itself, which contains beauty. It's the perception of these things which is actually beautiful. Now, who likes chocolate around here? Anyone like chocolate? Well, I've got a little box of chocolate which I'm going to hand out. It's got to be Haze. We all love chocolates. What is it about it that we love? It's not the colour, it's not where they came from, or it might be Haze or something, but it's not. It's not the colour, the weight, the sauce, or anything like that. Again, it's a taste. It's when we take that and we eat it, we find that, yes, we like it. So it comes back to our senses. And it comes back to, it's not the object itself, but our enjoyment of it through our senses. So I'll give you this, and you can hand them out. Don't take too many. There's a kilogram there, so it should be enough. So, philosophers, of course, have been looking at the subject of aesthetics for thousands of years, going way, way back. The triad of philosophers is truth, beauty, goodness. What are they? What is truth? What is goodness? What is beauty? And so there's been so many books written on this, so many treatises written on what are these things. And the philosophers from Plato and Aristotle believed that beauty actually lay in the object, in these things, such as a vase, and that beauty actually came from this and came to us as a physical entity. And that view persisted right through to the 18th century, when English philosophers, Hume, Burke, Locke, a few others, and Immanuel Kant in Germany realised that it doesn't lie in the object, it lies in our mind. And it's our perception of the object, not the object itself. And this was a radical change in terms of how the philosophers start to see it. So beauty is no quality in things themselves, it exists merely in the mind which contemplates them. was Edmund Burke, the philosopher in 1757, wrote that. Now, Donald Marnick, who many of you would know from, he worked here in the 1970s at Adelaide University, and he's done a lot of work in the landscape. He wrote that any landscape is composed not only of what lies before our eyes, but what lies within our heads. So it's this idea, it's not what's out there in front of your eyes, it's what's behind your eyes. It's what's in your head. And instead of saying, the bottom of this has dropped out, but instead of saying the object is beautiful, we should say, I think it's beautiful. Because that's really reflecting that it's coming from our mind. The object itself isn't beautiful. So you go to landscapes like Switzerland and the inside passage of Alaska and say, isn't that a beautiful landscape? You should say, I think it's beautiful. Now that's not likely to take root very quickly, I don't think, but it's because the shorthand version of that is that's beautiful. You know, that's what we think. But people still try and measure beauty. And back in the 1970s, many of us were involved in attempts to try and measure and map scenic beauty by going out, particularly weekends, many volunteers going out and measuring everything we could about the landscape. So we measured the vegetation, the land slope, the land cover, the land uses, everything we could think of, and plot them all up on GISs at the time and think, oh, this is great, we'll get the landscape quality out of this, we'll see what beauty is. But we expected that everything was measured and the landscape beauty would emerge from that, but it never did. It never did. And Maud McBride, many of you would know Maud from the University of Adelaide Geography, led the work for the National Trust nationally to try and develop a method that would work out how you could actually measure and map scenic beauty in Australia, because there were many attempts through the National Trust to put landscapes onto the National Estate Register. But the National Australian Heritage Commission at the time said, no, we need a methodology that we can all agree to. And so she sponsored, the committee sponsored a number of studies in this area, but at the end of them, and they were very good studies, the idea was still eludes, she said. And so they didn't get there. And many of you would have been involved, I think, in this study. Philip Kane, how many would have known about that back in the 1970s? A few. That was one of the studies that was done. Dr. Philip Kane came out from California and did one of these studies. Now, how we analyse, if we analyse landscape, we're using our cognitive, our analytical ability in our brain. We try and analyse it. So these people running around the weekends measuring all of these things, that's a cognitive process, that's an analytical process, whereby we're trying to understand through analysis what the landscape consists of. But when we taste chocolate or listen to music or look at an object with our senses, we basically are seeing, we're using our senses. And the science of measuring how our brain, and here, interprets what it receives through our senses is called psychophysics. Now, that's not a new term. It's been around for about 150 years, developed by Gustav Fechner, a German psychologist, in 1860. And there's a vast literature on this, many, many journals on it. Psychophysics is a very mature science. So, as Wikipedia define it, connecting the publicly observable world, which is the world out there, with the person's privately experienced impression of it in here. That's what psychophysics is, trying to find how to understand what our senses receive by our brain. So that's the science of psychophysics, which underlies now the science of trying to understand and measure and map landscape quality. So how does it apply to landscapes? Well, the key is to measure our preferences, our likes and dislikes. Not going out and running around the landscape and trying to measure everything out there, but measuring what's in here, how we like it, how much we prefer it, our preferences. So can it be measured and mapped? Yes, it can, in answer to the question. And the method I've developed is I've applied now to 12 studies, both in South Australia and also the Lake District, as I mentioned, in England. So I know it works. It's a system and a process, a simple process that can be done. By the way, if you have questions or comments as I go, just sing them out because it'd be better for me to save them up to the end. So this is the method I use. I call it the community preferences method. And it involves photographing the area. So you become very, very familiar with the region that you're interested in by going out and photographing that area. You classify the area into units of similar characteristics. So plains, mountains and so forth, but a bit more detailed than that. Then you select photographs which can sample those characteristics, so you are representative of those characteristics, and you assemble an internet-based survey, and have something like 400 people rate them on a scale. I use a 1 to 10 scale, low to high, and then through the analysis of those ratings, you can then apply them and map the landscape quality of that region. So it's a fairly simple process. It takes a lot of time. A typical study would be about 1,500 hours, six months work, and a lot of detail, quality control and so forth. But because it relies on the community assessing this, not one person, it doesn't rely on an expert person. So it is very robust in terms of if an appeal occurs and you end up in court over the ratings, you can say to the judge, well, it's not my opinion, it's the opinion of 400 people out there in the community. So it withstands appeal. It also, being a subjective quality, is the community should judge it because they're the ones who derive benefit from the landscape. One of the issues of this, of course, is the use of photographs. It's not very practical to take a couple of hundred people out in the field to actually rate the landscape. There have been some studies that have done that, one in Vancouver, but generally it's not on. It's just impractical. The weather can be against you, all sorts of other things can be against you, and you simply won't see the entire landscape in the time that you have. So many studies have looked at this issue of whether photographs can adequately represent the field assessment, be similar to that. And they've found that providing they meet certain criteria, you can use photographs. And there's been a study of all of these studies of them, and there's found a correlation of 0.86 between field assessments and photograph assessments. So that's a very high rating, very high correlation. So these are the criteria that I've developed, partly from the literature, partly from my own experience in doing it. And the principle is to standardise the scenes so that the respondent judges the landscape, not the photograph. So all of these things attempt to standardise the scenes as much as possible. So 50mm equivalent of the photo lens is equivalent to the human eye. It should be in colour, horizontal format. You don't want some horizontal and some vertical formats. You try and standardise them. You avoid photo composition such as this because that always will increase landscape ratings. You can't make a sow's ear out, or a silk purse out of a sow's ear, but you can in photographs. Photographers know that by doing all sorts of things like this, you can in fact create a very nice photo. But that's not the landscape as you really want to rate. You're artificially increasing the ratings by doing that. You avoid strong side lighting, for instance, the evening light. This is the photographer's dream to have lovely strong side lighting because you get beautiful colours and shadows and so forth. But you avoid that. That's a transitory thing. You're looking really at the landscape as it exists through the day to try and standardise them as much as possible. So applying this method, I've looked at the whole of South Australia for a thesis. I'll go in each one of these in a minute, including the Lake District, and also recently a survey of the world's best landscapes. I've also looked at the visual amenity provided by trees, assessed the impact of wind farms on visual quality, and assess the visual impact of developments on the Lumen Maui and along the coast. And this is just an example from one of those surveys. This shows a sand dune with houses along the top, and this is the same scene without the houses, and you can see the difference in rating, quite a large 2.5 units difference between the two. So it gives you a basis, a quantitative basis to judge visual impact. This is a typical rating sheet. How many of you have done this? Quite a lot of people, I imagine, would have. Yeah, a few people have done it. This is a typical one done for the Lothian Ranges, and it comes up on the internet on the screen, person's computer, and they just tick on one of these boxes up here. 1 is low, very low, and 10 is very high. So you just tick on one of those. I use an internet instrument called SurveyMonkey, but there are many of them available, and what it does is randomise each photograph. So every person who's doing this get a different order of photographs. One of the problems with these sort of surveys is you're using a set order of photographs is the problem that one photograph will affect the one next following. This way, through randomising, avoids that. So every person gets a different set of photographs to judge. So looking at the South Australia as a whole, and this was done from PhD, South Australia is a pretty flat sort of country, state. It has a few ranges such as the Flinders and the Mount Lothian Ranges down here, but much of this area throughout the pastoral area is, and even the agricultural area, is pretty flat with a few ridges through it. So these purple areas are the Gibber Plains. They only rate about 3. Some people, when they rated them as 10, because they said, this is fantastic, you know, they've never seen anything like it. But it's essentially a very flat landscape. There's no trees, there's no landform, there's no water, there's nothing else. There's just rocks, you know, it's just flat. So they rate pretty low at 3 is the average. 4 across very much of the pastoral areas and some of the agricultural areas. 5 more upland areas with more trees and things in it. And then the higher ratings are really for the ranges and also the coast of Eyre Peninsula. I relied on photos from the pastoral board for some of the areas in the northern area, including the Musgraves. But I also did a trip with the family from Port Augusta right through to Marla, back through through Unadata and Maree, back up to Burnsville and down to Winneminka, and looked at this whole area as well. But I also relied on other people's photographs as well. So overall, had a lot of photographs to work with. This is the tree amenity survey that I did for the Native Vegetation Council of South Australia. Under their Act, they're required to, when they consider applications for clearance of vegetation, to consider the amenity value of those trees. And so I put in a proposal to develop a model to do that, and they accepted it, and this was a result that had a survey of over 100 scenes of trees taken from up in the mid-north Clare area, through the Mount Lothian Ranges, down through the southeast, of basically remnant trees, large remnant trees in the fields. And also, I also classified the characteristics of the trees. So classified them in terms of their height, the trunks, the canopy form, the density of them, the health, and the species. And the predictive model enabled the amenity value to be determined based on these sorts of characteristics. So, but what this means is that the tree height, this through here, increases with height, and the rating actually increases through here. The same with the health. These are, at the top is dead trees, dying trees, and down here is healthy trees, and the higher ratings are for these trees here, the healthy trees. Also, the more the trees, the higher the rating. Now, I don't know why that's happened like that. The model found, that I developed, found the key factors for the height of the trees, this one, how vertical they were. People didn't find them very attractive because they were sort of sloping like this. The tree health, the healthier the tree, and the number of trees. These were the key factors in terms of measuring or putting in the model. The Coastal Viewscapes project was done for the Environment Department, their Coastal Protection branch, and the objective was to look at the entire coast of South Australia, nearly over 5,000 kilometres, so it involved driving around the whole coast, taking several thousand photographs. I remember being out on the west coast on a dirt road and getting nearly bombed out there. And another point, over on the west coast, very remote, getting out of the car and going to the fence line. I always go to the fence line to take photographs rather than from the car, so I don't have the fence line in the way. And I got out the fence line and there was a sheep stuck in the fence, had pushed his head through the wire netting. And so I went back to the car and got some pliers and cut him free, and he went off. And it struck me that if I hadn't stopped right then in all that remote road and just happened to be there when that sheep was there, he would have died. Because it was midsummer. I don't know how often the farmer came out to check his sheep, but there was obviously a bit of a problem there. So this survey involved nearly 140 scenes plus benchmark scenes of South Australia. These benchmark scenes are to be able to relate this survey to other surveys of South Australia. Over 2,000 participants. Divided the coast here, I talked about the units that I classified them into, and in the case of the coast, I classified into high cliffs, low cliffs, dunes and beaches, headlands, and this is samphires and mangroves. And you can see the average rating, high cliffs was the highest, followed by the headlands, and the samphires and mangroves are somewhat lower across the coast.
They're generic ratings for just an average. So the ratings overall in South Australia coast, around here 6, 7 and 8 is over 3/4 of the ratings. You remember that map of South Australia as a whole showed much of South Australia is in the 4s and 5s. The coast of South Australia is our premier landscape resource. Particularly areas such as the west coast of Eyre Peninsula, such as here, high cliffs, steep cliffs, very attractive. People find them very attractive and rate them very high. That one rates over 8, and this is the north coast of Kangaroo Island, which also rates very high, 7.56. So you can see that these high cliffs contribute a lot to these high ratings. Part of the project is, of course, mapping it, and this shows the end result, some of the maps involved. And Kangaroo Island came out 7, there's a 7 along much of the coast, a little patch of 8 down Cape de Cooney. York Peninsula, much of that is 6 around through there. This is the west coast of Eyre Peninsula, and that comes out at 7. But there's a little patch down here, the Whalers Way, down south of Port Lincoln. Have anyone done that? You know, imagine a few. That's the highest rated coast in South Australia. It's really very attractive coast. Unfortunately, on these cliffs, they built a wind farm, the Cathedral Rocks wind farm, on top of the cliffs, which I think was very unfortunate. Now, it's interesting that when you analyse some of the detailed characteristics, you find some interesting findings. I had people rate or score the beach quality on the basis of whatever they thought was beach, high quality beach. So at this end, a 5 would be a very high quality beach, probably sandy, extensive, very large, long beach, whereas at this end might be very rocky and rather a poor beach. But you can see there that the rating, the average rating, basically stays the same across the quality of the beach. So they don't vary. The high quality of the beach doesn't increase ratings. And when you move to how much seaweed is on the beach, that affects it very much. This is the beach quality score, and you can see here where there's a lot of seaweed up in the 5s and 4s, the rating of the beach is very low. But if you go over here, where high quality beach, over here 4s and 5s, the seaweed score is very low. So the end result of that is that large quantities of seaweed actually detract from the beach quality, and thereby detract from the overall landscape quality. They may have, well they do have, of course, ecological value, but I'm not talking about that, I'm talking about their aesthetic effect. And essentially they affect the aesthetics of it. I did a survey as part of this exercise, the Coastal Viewscapes project, on the coastal developments and their impact, their visual impact. So it looked at urban housing, holiday housing, marinas and aquaculture. Over 1,600 participants. There were 41 scenes with and without development. So again, there was a scene with the development and then one without, but they're all randomised. So the one without didn't follow the one with, or thereabouts. The average with development was just over 7.09, just missing there. The average with development is 5, and you can see quite a gap there between, this is the blue line is without the development, and this shows the ratings with the development. So this is just a couple of examples here. This is Glenelg with John Olsen's apartments that he approved down here, which block the view from Anzac Highway. And you can see a very major effect on the visual quality of that area. It's dropped 41% because of those apartments. That scene without the apartments rates 6.14, with the apartments 3.6. Now Petrel Cove is also an example where put in a hypothetical subdivision, and it's rated there 4.7, and without it would have been nearly 8. So there's another 40% loss. It's interesting, this particular headland was part of a subdivision years ago. When I worked in the State Planning Office in the early 70s, we found that we were working on the Mount Lothian Ranges and found that there was a subdivision that could be built on down here. In fact, there was one house built at the end of the promontory, the headland there. And we convinced the State Planning Authority that they should buy up this entire subdivision before it got built on, so as to preserve this iconic view, and they did so, and they actually bought the house out as well. So that protected that view from development. The Barossa region was a study done for the councils, the Barossa and Light Council, and the Regional Development Board. And the objective was to look at the scenic quality of the Barossa region outside of the townships, but it also included the cultural items such as wineries and farm structures and so forth, rural industries. 120 scenes plus another 30 benchmark scenes to relate it to the rest of South Australia, and over 1,200 participants. So again, this is half lost here, but the major rating was 5 and 6 through this area, nearly 3/4 of it. So this is just some examples of the ratings of these. Scenic Road is actually the name of a road up near Linddock. It's actually 6.5. This is Anguston, the Eden Valley area, and this rate's in the 6s as well. So this is an area which is fairly barren up through here, out near the Greenock, and that rate is somewhat lower. But the Barossa region as a whole, this is the map produced from this. The North Power River, which is the boundary actually of the two councils, the Lythe and the Barossa Council, rates 6.5, one of the highest areas, and similarly the Barossa Ranges also rate about 6.5. The whole range though was about from 5 to 6.5, so it's only 1.5 units, very narrow sort of range, because you're dealing with a fairly small area. And this gives you the ratings of different parts of the area. Freedom Plains out here, fairly treeless, fairly flat, somewhat lower. An interesting finding was that the vines, which cover the area, don't enhance the landscape. It's the trees that actually enhance it. And the vines actually diminish it, believe it or not. But these graphs show this. This is a score of trees across all of the survey, and it shows that as the score of trees, the visual significance of the trees increases, so do the ratings. They increase slightly across that area. But the opposite applies to vines. Here you have, as the vines increase here, the rating actually decreases. And this one shows the two combined, so you have the tree scores up here and the vine scores here. And for high tree scores, you have very low vine score. For high vine score, you have very low tree score. And so it's the vines, the trees, the presence of the trees, not the vines that actually enhance scenic quality. And these are just a couple of photos showing this, that you basically have a treeless vineyard with a couple of trees in the distance, probably along the road or the creek, and similarly here. When I was doing the tree amenity survey, I was down in the southeast in Coonawarra, and I was asking one of the locals about why aren't there any trees in the vineyards? And they said, oh, we remember in the 1960s, we bulldozed all the red gums into a big pile and set fire to them. That's what happened. If you drive around the vineyards in the Barossa, in the Clare Valley, Langhorne Creek, down the southeast, you'll find the same. McLeod Vale, you won't find very many trees in the vineyards. They're all outside of that, but it's the trees that actually enhance the landscape. The Lumen Maui survey was done for the department as well as the local Natural Resource Management Council for the river, and it covered this entire river down through here, including the lakes and the Coorong. The objective was to measure the scenic quality of the area, but also to look at the visual impact of developments along the River Maui. So there were 120 scenes in all, or 150 actually, with benchmark scenes, and nearly 1,700 participants. And that just gives you an idea of some of the ratings that came out of it. The Coorong with the large area of water, the river itself and the lakes. The rating overall was really 6 for the river and the floodplain, because you have water, and water when it's present always enhances landscape quality by about 1.5 to 2 units. So having water there will always bring it up. If the water wasn't there, it would be down in the 5s and 4s. So this is a photo of Cataracto with the trees there. This would be 7.5, and this is another river scene, the 6th there. So this is a map that resulted from that. The greens here, the 6 really follows the river down, all through here is the river and the adjacent red gums and trees. The yellow is really outside of the floodplains, the flatter area outside, and the reds and the oranges are salt pans and salt lakes, which rate much lower. Water is very significant, as I just mentioned, and you don't need very much of it. Just a glimpse of water is actually enough to bring up the ratings. And this is the ratings of all the water scenes in this survey 6.32, and without water in the scene it rated 4.8 and 4.3. So you can see quite a big difference, nearly 2 units difference, the presence of water lifting that. And I find that just the presence of a glimpse of it is enough to bring it up into the 6s, whereas otherwise it would be down to 4s and 5s. I looked also at the colour of the water, and there's really very little difference. There's blue water here, 6.31. This is probably brown water, 6.33, so it's fairly insignificant difference. But it's interesting to speculate, why is water such an important feature in the landscape? River reflections. This is mirror-like reflections and fair reflections, and you can see here that according to how good the reflections are, the ratings drop. So very good reflections give very high ratings. Influence of lighting. Now I said earlier that one of my criteria is not to have side lighting, strong side lighting, but I was interested to see what effect it has on the cliffs because it brings up colour. And so this is a scene of Big Bend in the River Maui, a place known as Big Bend, and this is the afternoon light here, 7.64. A few hours later into the evening, 8.37. So you can see it has quite a significant effect there. And this is a scene from the next day I'll talk about the Flinders Ranges, where Griselda Hill at Arkaroola rated 6 just in the afternoon, and it increased 5:30, 6.3, 7 o'clock, 6.7, and if I'd come back an hour later or so, probably was 7 or even higher. So it's quite a significant effect, the side lighting. The River Maui tree health was again important, as I showed earlier in the tree amenity survey. Dead trees, well, you didn't see these figures in the early one, unfortunately, but the dead trees rated 4, the drowned trees rated overall was 5, dying trees 5.29, but healthy trees 6.3. So again, the healthier the tree, and this graph shows the average for those, the better in terms of their scenic quality. As part of this River Maui survey, I did a survey of developments along the river to look at their visual impact. And I used a 9-point scale here, which is dislike up this end and like up this end, with neutral being the 5 in the middle. This survey looked at housing, houseboats, caravan parks and pumps. So here we have a scene of houseboats, and it rated 4, just under the 5, about 4.7. And the reason for it being in the dislike end is that the houseboats actually detract from the naturalness of the river. Without those houseboats, the rating would probably be 6. But those houseboats actually bring it down because it reduces the naturalness of the scene. Now the river, there are a lot of riverside shacks, as many of you know, and I had people who identified themselves as shack owners rate them, and they said they were 6.3, so that's really up in the light area. But the non-shack owners was 4.34, so quite a significant difference between the two, which is just human nature. Now this one's a bit difficult to see, but the irrigation pump, which you see quite a lot along the river, rated 2.8, so that's right down here. These have quite a significant physical impact as well as an aesthetic impact on the river. To take these photos, there's a company that runs a launch that goes from the border right down to Wellington over 5 days. It takes about 40 or 50 people on it. You don't stay on the boat, you stay in motels every night, but it enables you to go fairly fast down the river, and I use that to take photos of the length of the river, which is very useful. It's a good trick if anyone wants to do it. These are comments by participants in the survey, and it basically shows that the river's in a pretty bad state. Just read those. And these were just typical of the sort of comments that people were writing in the survey. So I always provide opportunity for people to comment on the area.
What age group were these people?
All over, right through. It'd have to be above 18, but they'll be right through. I can show you the exact numbers. Flinders Ranges was a survey that I did for the Department of Environment and Heritage. They were interested in the Arkaroola area because they were doing a lot of work in terms of management at the time, working towards the creation of a park up there. And I convinced them that you couldn't just look at the Arkaroola area in isolation, you had to look at it in terms of the whole Flinders Ranges, the northern Flinders Ranges. So they agreed to me to do it from Hawker north, which is good because I bushwalked over a lot of this area anyway. Later on, when the survey results came out, I had people from Melrose and down south saying, why didn't you do us as well? couldn't convince the department to do that, stretch it that far. So the idea was to measure and map the scenic quality of the northern Flinders Ranges. 120 scenes, about 2,400 participants, and this gives the overall ratings. And you see here the sevens are up here in the reds. So you have Freeling Heights, you have the Gummies, the Hyson Range, the Wilpena Ramparts, the outside of the Wilpena, and the Elder Range of the sevens. There's a little 8 in here, Idiawi Gorge, which some of you know, it was an 8. But these brown areas are the 6s, and they include Arkarula itself. Now, much of Arkarula, the Mount Paint and Mount G area. When I went on the ridgetop tour up there to take photos, I looked around and saw this is a barren landscape. Really, there are no trees up here. It's a very barren landscape. And I thought it's only going to be a 6, not a 7. And that proved to be true when the survey results came in. It was a 6 throughout that area. These are some comments that people wrote about the uniqueness of the Flinders Ranges. And some of the ratings there, the Arkarula area, 6.38, and the Uruna Valley from St Mary's Peak, stretching away with the Hyson Range down here, the ABC Range over there, 7.89, so it's a very high rating. People were most familiar with the Wilpena and the Arkarula area, but not much with the areas in between, which is understandable. Being very familiar with an area increased ratings by 12%, so familiarity had a big effect. I found that 73% of respondents had climbed St Mary's Peak, which I was amazed at. You know, that so many of those, over 2,000 people, had actually climbed St Mary's Peak. How many people have done here? Oh yeah, quite a few. And also 20% have done the Arkarula trip, so how many have done that? Yeah, again, quite a lot. But you're all geographers. So this just gives the average ratings for these different ranges through the hills, through the Flinders Ranges. So the highest rated area was the Wilpena Pound area, and the Elders Range not far behind, as was the Hyson Range. This is Idiawi Gorge, which is a marvellous area. I had people score how spectacular these scenes were, each of the scenes, how spectacular they are on a 1 to 5 scale. And so down here is, say, 1 and 2 is fairly low spectacular, whereas, say, a scene like this would be up in the 4s or 5s. So you can see the effect on that in terms of ratings, much higher ratings, depending on how spectacular it is. I also had people score the vegetation, how visually significant the vegetation is, and also score how arid it looks or how lush it looks. So this is a scene of the Arkarula area, particularly arid vegetation, and this is St Mary's Peak with fairly lush vegetation. But what I found was that arid vegetation, which is at this end of the scale, scores very low in terms of its visual significance, whereas lush vegetation, such as this, scores very high. It really stands to reason. It's much more visually significant. So these are just some of the ratings of these particular scenes. Uruna Valley, sorry you can't see some of them, they dropped off the bottom. But the highest of the Uruna Valley was over 7, Armchair and Arkarula 6.9, Gormley Bluff and so forth. Now, I do predictive models in each of the studies, but I didn't want to bore you with those in each of the studies. I'm just showing you one for the Flinders Ranges. And you use multiple regression analysis to be able to take, on the one hand, the ratings that you get, and on the other hand, the scores of all the characteristics such as landform, land cover, land use, water, and all the other things, spectacular, and so forth. And you relate the two together in a statistical package, and it comes up with an equation. And that equation, the Y represents the landscape quality, and all of these represent the scores for these different attributes. So in this case, the landscape quality is a function of that constant plus the spectacularness of the landscape, the visual diversity of it, the terrain, how visually significant the terrain is, the vegetation, naturalness, and a few other factors. And that gives you an R-squared correlation coefficient of 0.85, which means that 85% of the variation in the landscape quality is explained by that equation. Now, no one's going to sit down and use that because it's too complicated. But if you took one factor, the spectacular factor, and used this equation, you get a result of 78%. 78% of the variation in the landscape quality will be explained by that equation. So you can apply that as a shortcut way of deriving this inequality. Here we have the spectacular score 1 to 5, and this, using this equation, gives you these ratings, 3.9 up to 8.3. So you don't have to actually go out and rate the landscape quality. You could just simply score how spectacular the scene is, and say it was 4, well that would probably be around about 7. If it was 5, it would probably be over 8. So it gives you a shortcut way of actually deriving what the scenic quality would be for that landscape. The Mount Lofty Ranges was a study I did pro bono for the World Heritage bit. Many of you know that there's a process underway to try and declare the Mount Lofty Ranges as a World Heritage Area. And the first stage of that is getting it nominated and accepted under the National Heritage list. So that process is underway at the moment. And then if that's accepted, then they hope to be able to move on to having nominated for World Heritage listing. So I said I'd measure and map the landscape quality of the ranges, and they accepted. And this is the result of that. Much of the ranges is 6, because it essentially comprises pastoral sort of landscapes of flat land, hilly land with trees, isolated trees, plus hills. Very attractive sort of landscape, we find those attractive. The hills face zone outside of Adelaide, just straight out there, is 7, and there's a couple of spots of 8 in there with the Maui Outer and the Waterfall Gully, waterfalls. And there's also a patch of 7 down here at Deep Creek. But much of it is 6. The Palmer Escarpment out to the east there, and down here is 5. The pine forest down here, Second Valley, and up through here, Kaiko, about 4. So overall, the 6 rating covered, and the 7 rating covered nearly 3/4 of the Mount Lofty Ranges. So the 6 dominates the view of the hills and the trees throughout the ranges. The pines rated 4, and there's a lot of tree plantations now throughout the ranges. If you drive around, you'll see a lot of the Eucalyptus globulus, the Tasmanian blue gum, planted in large patches. They're a monoculture, and they rate the same as the pines, 4. Then they lack the diversity of a native vegetation. This is an example of using using scattered trees, but changing the landform. So flat land with scattered trees is 5, undulating land with scattered trees is 6, and steep land with scattered trees is 7. So that gives you some generic numbers that if you're out there and looking at the landscape, you say, well, that's a 7 or that's a 6, depending on its landform. One of the surprise findings was that autumn colours actually diminish the landscape quality, believe it or not. This is a scene of vineyards up at Prairie Gully in winter with the green, 6.04, and this is with the autumn colours, 5.97. Now, the same occurred I had 3 identical sets of, this is one of the sets of scenes, and had 2 others showing the same scene in winter and in autumn. And the same results occur. Not a big difference, but consistent difference between them. Always a bit lower on the yellow. Why that would be, I don't know.
Is that statistically significant?
No, probably not. But it was just a consistent finding. Yeah, so it was just an interesting finding. So dense low trees rate about 5.27. Dense medium height, so this goes increasing in height, 6.7. And then dense tall trees over 7. You can see the effective height on the trees. This is a scene of Mount Lofty and Mount Benitha with the transmission lines, rated 5.9. Without the transmission lines, it was 6.5. You can't see it there, but it's 6.5. So the transmission lines lose about half a unit by the visual impact. The Lake District was one that I did for the Lake District National Park Authority, pro bono. I offered to do this and they accepted it. I was living overseas in Israel at the time, and it was quite convenient to whip up to England 2 or 3 times. The first time I went was in March, and I landed and it snowed overnight on the Ambleside, which is right in the heart of the Lake District, and had to stay there for a couple of days before the snow cleared enough to be able to get out and start photographing. But it was really good being able to see the landscape under snow. So I went there in winter, and then in spring, and then in summer. What I found, and this is the resulting map from this, the red spots are 8, and that's the high peaks in the Lake District. The brown areas are the ridges leading up to the peaks, but also the lakes. So this is Windermere through here, this is Coniston over here, Ullswater, Derwentwater up here, and some of the western lakes over here. So they only rated 6 or 7. The yellow area right through this area is the fells, and they're essentially barren. The fells used to be vegetated centuries ago, but that's long been cleared. And so they're now barren fells. You can barely see it here, but like that. They're trying to actually revegetate some. But they rate fairly low, only 5, because of their barrenness. And then out here to the west, you get the plains, the flat plains, which rate 4. That's a picture of Grassmere there. Lovely scene of scoring over great. These are some of the comments from participants. So, and this was an example of the same scene taken in winter and in summer. So here we have this Ladendale Pikes, which is in the heart of the Lake District, 8.31 under snow, and when it was in summer, it rated 8. So it actually rated higher under snow, and the English love snow. That's what I was told. So that's why it was. And unfortunately, you can't see the number there, but it's the same scene without the snow. These are some of the scenes in the Lake District, and this was one with spring flowers. So it's much yellower than what it looks like there, but it's with the flowers, 5.79, and without the spring flowers taken early on or later on in summer, 4.84. So 1 unit difference between the two. This is a scene of Lake District with and without sheep. With the sheep, showing there 5.5, and without them, 1 unit almost below that, less than that. And so you can see that the number of sheep, having sheep in the area, actually enhances the Lake District. So you can imagine New Zealand must do very well. Water in the Lake District, as we saw in the River Maui study, just a glimpse of it is enough to bring up the ratings of scenic quality. And this shows that very clearly. This is the percentage of the scene with water. So here's even less than 10%, but it rates nearly 7, and it only increases slightly with the increase of water. So a glimpse of water is enough to bring it up. This is a scene with the lake, 7.3, and without the lake, 6. You can see quite a significant difference, take out the lake. And just a couple of scenes of lakes in the Lake District. How many have been to the Lake District? I mentioned quite a few, yeah. Lovely area. Coniston Lake, where Sir Donald Campbell died when his boat flipped. Grassmere is a lovely lake, you can walk around in a couple of hours, and William Wordsworth lived over here in Dove Cottage. So overall, from all of those studies, some of the observations that I derive is that natural and agricultural lands score higher than urban and industrial uses. That's doesn't take much to see that. Monocultures are less preferred than species-rich ones. So tree plantations, which are all monocultures, are much less preferred than native vegetation. And here, preferences increase in terms of landforms, the height, the steepness, the rockiness, and the scale of the landform. Presence of trees always conveys naturalness in the scene. Water has a profound effect on landscape preferences, and provided it's not coloured, grossly coloured or polluted, it will always increase landscape preferences. Naturalness and visual diversity, I've always found in all of my studies, being a very key components in generating landscape quality. And also found a few clouds actually enhance landscape quality, better than just a cloudless sky. They actually bring it up a little bit. And some studies, not mine but others, have found that bird calls and natural sounds actually enhance scenic quality as well, but not artificial sounds like helicopters and drones. So some general findings. Familiarity enhances our liking for the landscape. The more we know it, the more we like it. Familiarity usually breeds contempt, is the usual saying. But I always use the example of Maui to Colin Chagrin, but I always think that Maui is something an area that most people would find fairly dull and uninteresting, rated about 4. But if you lived in that area all your life, you're born in it, you grew up in it, you have all these associations with it, then it's God's own country to you. And you'll rate that very highly. And that's the same with this. The more familiar you are with an area like the Mount Lothian Ranges, the higher you'll rate it. And the less you know, the lower. It's known as place attachment to the geographers, and it's an interesting area of study. The saying goes that beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder, which implies that everyone has their own view about what is beautiful, what is attractive. But the reality is actually the opposite. That what we like is very common to all. And this shows my studies through here that I've been talking about, but also the attributes of the participants. So this is age, education, gender and birthplace. And you can see across here, say for age, it doesn't vary all that much across all these ages. It doesn't vary very much apart from this one of education. Male and female is basically the same. And birthplace, whether born in Australia or outside, also is very similar. So what I've found, and what many studies have found, comparing different cultures, looking at the same scenes, is that the ratings tend to be very similar. They don't vary a great deal across cultures, across age, across education, across all these factors. A good view also enhances property values, as we well know. The real estate people always saying how good a view it is. There's been many studies of this, and the average is an increase of 18%. Now these are studies all over the world, not just Australia, but New Zealand, Hong Kong, Europe, America, various other places. And so they found an 18% increase overall. So that means that a property worth $500,000, they'll add $90,000 to it. So the view is very important, and you can put a price against it, a price against the value of it. In addition, of course, we go to countries which have attractive landscapes. You go to Switzerland, you go to places which have very high quality landscapes. And I've made an estimate looking at these and judging how important the landscape is in their tourist revenue for all these countries, and I worked out a figure of $25,000 per square kilometre per year is what the landscapes are worth to these countries. In Switzerland it's much higher, it's like $250,000. Australia is much lower, $1,500, because we're a big country, and that tourist dollar has to spread over a lot of country. New Zealand's a bit higher, $5,500. Landscape changes. Landscapes are always in constant change, as you well know, and this was an area, a project I did in the early 70s when I was working on the Mount Lothian Ranges. I did this privately to measure the extent of vegetation in the ranges. And I used air photographs from the lands department. We'd go over there and get a swag of air photographs for the region and take them home and map this on the maps. And then later on, when I completed that, did the 1945 ones from the old Ordnance Survey maps, the old mile and inch ones. Found there's a 50% change between 1945 and the late 60s between these two maps. So this has very significant ecological consequences, as we all know. The big blocks of vegetation have changed down to smaller ones, fragmented, distances apart much greater and so forth. But in terms of landscape, it probably actually enhanced it. We no longer had large blocks of vegetation, but we had scattered vegetation throughout these areas, scattered red gum, scattered smaller blocks of vegetation against hills and so forth. And that are probably more attractive visually than what that would have been. So who knows? There's no way of checking that. I did a survey in 2003 of the wind farms. This was at the beginning of the wind farms. There was only one at the time down in Cape Jervis. So I looked at scenes in the coast, 21 scenes around the coast, 47 inland scenes, and essentially took photos without the wind farms and then inserted digitally the wind farm within them. And so here you have Parsons Beach down the south coast, 8.84 without the wind farm, 5.85 with it. So you can see a very massive change just by those little things sticking up there. This shows the overall results of that, and the coastal scenes at the top. So the blue line represents the scene without the wind farm, and this represents the scene with the wind farm. This is the ratings of it on a 1 to 10 scale. So what you have here is, in all cases on the coast, the presence of the wind farm actually diminished landscape quality. Now, you also see that the ratings here are between 7 and 9. They're quite high because the sea is present, and where water is present, the ratings will be high. When you go to the inland scenes here, they're much lower, down to 7. But nevertheless, for the 6s and 7s, the presence of the wind farm generally diminished the landscape quality, always reduced it slightly. But when you got down to about 5, down here, the presence of the wind farm actually enhanced the landscape quality because it added diversity and interest into an otherwise fairly dull landscape. These landscapes are essentially flat, treeless, and they don't really have a lot going for them. An example of this is Allendale down in the southeast, which was subject to a wind farm application, which was appealed against. It went to the Environment Resources Development Court, and Judge Costello, in his wisdom, decided against it on the basis of its visual impact. He said it will have an adverse effect on the landscape of the area. Now, my opinion is, based on this result, is that that's an ideal place for a wind farm because it's flat, it's treeless, it has good strong winds through there, the southeast. It would be ideal for a wind farm. It was interesting that in that case it was knocked out. There's been a lot of studies in recent decades of the health benefits of viewing nature, natural scenes, and natural landscapes, and we've long suspected this, John Muir's quote there, that nature heals and restores people. We go to bush to enjoy it and be restored. There's been over 20 studies, and having people walk through natural scenes compared with urban scenes, there's a 68% difference. It's higher for natural scenes than for urban scenes. And the measures weren't just stated preferences, but also a lot of physiological measures, heartbeat and infrared waves and so forth. And my surveys have consistently found that naturalness always enhances landscape quality. This is an example of one of these studies done in England, where they use major large databases of using GIS, and they can map the amount of green space in an area. And they also, through their sensors, ask people how healthy they feel. And so this was an example where up the top end they're saying they're really in good health, down here they're in poor health. They're rating their poor health. So this is in poor health up here, and this is good health down here. And so you can see that as the slope goes down, the amount of green space increases. So there's a clear relationship between the amount of green space and the amount of health that they feel. And there's been many studies like this done in the Netherlands and in other countries around the world. And they all consistently show this, that the amount of green space in an urban area is very important in terms of improving health. Now, theory should underlie all of this stuff. Theory tries to explain why we love what we love. Jay Appleton said, just as the Brisbane wicket after rain used to be said to reduce all batsmen to an equal plane of incompetence. So this absence of aesthetic theory brings every professional down to the same plane as a man in the street. So what he's saying is that without a theory, anyone's opinion is good. That's all I'm saying. So there's been a number of theories. These are the 4 main theories that are around in landscape to say why we like what we like. Habitat theory postulates that because we all grew up in the African savannah, that's the sort of landscape we like, park-like landscapes. That's what their backyards look like, our parklands look like, with scattered trees on grass. Prospect refuge theory basically holds that we see without being seen. This is the idea that you have a prospect, say a high point, you can look out, see everyone out there, or any threats, without being seen yourself. Affective theory underlies the health and restorative benefits of landscapes. Information processing theory is getting information out of the landscape that helps you. But all of these theories are evolutionary based. They're all saying what we prefer is survival enhancing. In other words, we like landscapes which aid our survivability. But I find that a bit difficult. If you think of the Flinders Ranges, it would be pretty difficult to survive there, and yet we like the Flinders Ranges. Stephen Kaplan, who did this theory, aesthetic reactions reflect neither the casual nor trivial aspect of human makeup. What he's saying is that these things are actually very fundamental to us. They're actually important in terms of our survivability. It's not just, oh, isn't that a nice landscape? We think that that actually aids our survivability. Well, that's the theory. Now, there's been many studies that have actually examined these theories and tested them against evidence, And you'd have to say that there's some empirical support, there's no definite, it's not definitive. And so there's still a need for a real adequate theory of landscape. Now I'm just going to finish up now with this final survey of the world's best landscapes. It seemed to me that having looked at a lot of landscapes in South Australia and the Lake District, it would be interesting to see what the world's best landscapes look like. And so I did a survey looking at sites that have been nominated in the World Heritage List, of which there are many, and there's many lists of world wonders. And I've got 20 of those. There's a lot of commonality between these lists. I selected 45 sites with 3 scenes of each taken off the internet, and what I'm going to show you now is the top 10 scenes that came out of this survey. So the 10th one was Predictive Lakes in Croatia, which is a nice scene of waterfalls. This is 4 scenes, the next 4, Lumen Mountains in China, were 9th and 7th. Weilin, there you are, Weilin. Torres de Paine in Chile, and a Norwegian field scene. This is the next 5, going down to number 2, Emerald Lake. I took that scene a few years ago. Norwegian field, Victoria Falls. All of these have water, you'll notice. They all have water. And Torres de Paine, which I think actually is my favourite scene. And the topmost scene was this, Predictive Lakes, Croatia. Now, because it has waterfalls, it's very attractive. But why is it only 8.55? And it's the only reason I can give for that, why isn't it 9.55? It should be. The only reason I can give is that people didn't know what was coming in the survey. It was all randomised, of course, and they only did the survey once. If they did it again, they'd know a bit about what was coming, and they would probably adjust their ratings accordingly. So I would expect that would be somewhat higher. But I mean, I've got scenes in South Australia that rate higher than that. So in conclusion, yes, scenic quality can be measured and it can be mapped, but we have to use our judgment, not go out there and run around the landscape, but rather analyse the landscape, but rather use our judgment, our preferences on it. And the method really should be used nationally to assess Australia's best landscapes. Nationally, the Australian Heritage Commission and the Department has really taken a back seat and really has done very little in this area. I've got a website called scenicsolutions.world, which has all of this information plus a lot beside. It's a new website. And I've also got a little pamphlet on your desk there, a book that I published this year on the science of scenery. That's a print-on-demand book through Amazon.com. They only print it when you put in an order, so it's not available through bookshops, but it's available through Amazon.com. Thanks very much. That's it.